Maya Rodriguez walked through the doors of Westfield Community College with her worn leather jacket pulled tight around her shoulders. The September morning air carried the familiar scent of fresh paint and new beginnings, but Maya felt anything but hopeful. At 28, she was older than most students, and the intricate tattoos covering her arms and neck made her stand out like a storm cloud in a sunny sky. The hallways buzzed with excited chatter from 18-year-olds discussing weekend parties and upcoming football games. Maya kept her head down, navigating through clusters of students who seemed to belong to a world she had never been part of. Her combat boots echoed against the polished floors as she searched for room 204, where her first art class would begin. Art had always been her escape, her sanctuary during the darkest moments of her life. During her military service, she had sketched in the margins of mission reports and drawn portraits of her fellow soldiers on scraps of paper. Now, as she tried to rebuild her civilian life, art felt like the only bridge between who she had been and who she might become. Finding the classroom, Maya hesitated at the doorway. Through the glass, she could see students arranging easels and chatting animatedly. The room was bright and welcoming, filled with natural light streaming through tall windows. Colorful paintings lined the walls, and the air smelled of acrylic paint and possibility. Taking a deep breath, Maya pushed open the door. The conversations didn't stop immediately, but she noticed several students glancing in her direction. Their eyes lingered on the detailed sleeve of tattoos that extended from her wrist to where her jacket began. Even with long sleeves, the intricate designs peeked out at her collar and cuffs. "You must be Maya," said a warm voice. Professor Sarah Chen approached with a genuine smile, her paint-stained apron suggesting she was as hands-on as her students. "Welcome to Introduction to Fine Arts. Please, find any seat that feels comfortable." Maya nodded gratefully and scanned the room. Most students had already paired up or formed small groups around their easels. She spotted an empty station near the back corner and made her way over, aware of the whispers that followed her movement. "Did you see all those tattoos?" she heard someone say in a stage whisper. "Probably gang-related," another voice added with barely concealed disdain. Maya's jaw tightened, but she kept walking. She had heard worse, much worse. During her 8 years in the Navy, she had faced down enemy combatants, survived impossible missions, and earned the respect of some of the toughest warriors in the world. A few college kids with limited worldviews weren't going to break her spirit. Setting up her easel, Maya tried to focus on Professor Chen's introduction to the semester. They would be exploring various mediums, from charcoal sketching to oil painting, with an emphasis on finding their individual artistic voices. The professor's enthusiasm was infectious, and Maya found herself genuinely excited about the possibilities ahead. "Let's start with a simple exercise," Professor Chen announced. "I want everyone to create a self-portrait, but not of how you look. Draw how you feel, how you see yourself when no one else is watching. Use any medium you're comfortable with." Maya selected a piece of charcoal and stared at the blank paper. How did she see herself? The question was more complex than Professor Chen probably realized. Was she the decorated Navy SEAL who had completed over 100 classified missions, the survivor who had pulled herself back from the brink after losing her entire team? Or was she simply a woman trying to find peace in a world that seemed determined to judge her by her appearance? As she began to sketch, Maya became aware of the conversation happening at the easel next to her. 2 students, Jessica and Brandon, were talking just loud enough for her to hear. "I can't believe they let people like that into art classes," Jessica said, not bothering to lower her voice. "This is supposed to be a creative, peaceful environment." "Look at those tattoos," Brandon replied, glancing over at Maya. "She probably just got out of prison or something. I bet she's never even held a paintbrush before." Maya's hand paused mid-stroke. She had been drawing without conscious thought, her fingers moving with the muscle memory of countless hours spent sketching during quiet moments between missions. The image taking shape on her paper was intricate and detailed, showing a figure emerging from shadows, with wings that seemed to be both protective and battle-worn. "Maybe she's here to deal drugs," Jessica continued, clearly enjoying her speculation. "I heard that's what people with that many tattoos usually do." Other students began to take notice of the conversation, and Maya felt the weight of their stares. She had faced down terrorists and survived firefights, but the casual cruelty of these young people cut deeper than she expected. This was supposed to be her fresh start, her chance to build something beautiful after years of destruction and loss. Professor Chen had moved to the other side of the room, discussing technique with a group of eager students. She hadn't noticed the building tension in Maya's corner, and Maya wasn't about to create a scene on her first day. "I bet she can't even read," Brandon said with a cruel laugh. "Probably thinks this is some kind of vocational training for tattoo artists." That comment struck particularly deep. Maya held a bachelor's degree in military history and had earned multiple commendations for strategic planning and leadership. She spoke 3 languages fluently and had trained with some of the most elite military units in the world, but these students saw only her tattoos and made their assumptions accordingly. Maya's grip on the charcoal tightened, but she forced herself to continue drawing. Each stroke became more deliberate, more precise. The figure on her paper began to take on life, the details so fine they seemed to breathe. Years of maintaining absolute focus under pressure had taught her to channel emotion into action, and her artwork became a testament to that discipline. "She's probably just here to scope out easy targets," Jessica whispered, but her voice carried across the quiet studio. "People with that many tattoos are usually criminals." Several other students had now stopped their own work to listen to the ongoing commentary. Maya noticed a few disapproving looks directed at Jessica and Brandon, but no one spoke up. The silent complicity stung almost as much as the direct insults. Professor Chen finally approached Maya's station to check on her progress. As she looked at the emerging artwork, her expression changed from polite interest to genuine amazement. "Maya, this is extraordinary," she said softly, her voice carrying just far enough for nearby students to hear. "The detail work, the emotional depth. Have you had formal training?" "Some," Maya replied quietly, not wanting to draw more attention to herself. But the damage was already done. Professor Chen's praise had caused several students to crane their necks, trying to get a glimpse of Maya's work. The whispers shifted from cruel speculation to confused curiosity. "How is she doing that?" someone asked. "That's not beginner work," another student observed. Jessica and Brandon exchanged uncertain glances, but they weren't ready to abandon their narrative. If anything, the quality of Maya's work seemed to reinforce their conviction that something wasn't right about her presence in their classroom. "Probably learned to draw in prison," Brandon muttered, though his voice lacked its earlier confidence. Maya set down her charcoal and looked directly at him for the first time. Her eyes held a steadiness that made him shift uncomfortably in his seat. She had stared down armed insurgents in hostile territory, and Brandon's juvenile bravado crumbled under that gaze. "Is there a problem?" Maya asked quietly, her voice carrying an authority that seemed to fill the space around them. The room had grown noticeably quieter, with most students now paying attention to the confrontation. Professor Chen looked between Maya and Brandon, clearly sensing tension but not understanding its source. "No problem," Brandon said quickly, suddenly finding his easel fascinating. But Jessica wasn't ready to back down. "We're just wondering what someone like you is doing in an art class," she said with false sweetness. "This isn't exactly the kind of place we expected to find your type." The words hung in the air like a challenge. Maya felt the familiar surge of adrenaline she had experienced before every mission, the heightened awareness that came with knowing she was about to face opposition. But this wasn't a battlefield. And these weren't enemy combatants. They were just ignorant kids who had been raised to fear what they didn't understand. "My type?" Maya repeated, her voice dangerously quiet. Professor Chen stepped closer, finally recognizing that intervention was needed. "Perhaps we should focus on our artwork," she suggested diplomatically. "Maya, would you mind sharing what inspired your piece?" Maya looked down at her drawing, seeing it as if for the first time. The figure she had created was powerful and vulnerable simultaneously, marked by experiences but not broken by them. It was, she realized, exactly how she saw herself in her most honest moments. "It's about transformation," she said simply. "About becoming something new while carrying the marks of everything you've been through." The honesty in her voice caught several students off guard. For a moment, the hostility in the room softened, replaced by something that might have been curiosity or even respect. But Jessica wasn't finished. "That's very poetic," she said with obvious sarcasm. "But some of us are here to actually learn art, not to listen to life stories from people who probably shouldn't be here in the first place." The words hit their mark, and Maya felt her carefully maintained composure begin to crack. She had survived tours in Afghanistan and Iraq, had lost friends and teammates, had earned medals for valor and sacrifice. Yet here she was, being made to feel like an intruder in a community college art class by students who had never faced anything more challenging than a difficult exam. "You don't know anything about me," Maya said, her voice still controlled, but carrying an edge that made several students step back. "We know enough," Jessica replied confidently. "People don't get tattoos like that unless they're trying to intimidate others or cover up a criminal past. This is supposed to be a safe space for creative expression, not a place where decent students have to worry about their safety." The accusation was so absurd, so completely divorced from reality, that Maya almost laughed. She had dedicated her adult life to protecting people like Jessica, to ensuring they could live in safety and pursue their dreams without fear. The irony was bitter and profound. Professor Chen had heard enough. "Jessica, that's completely inappropriate," she said firmly. "I won't tolerate discrimination in my classroom." But Jessica wasn't backing down. "I'm just saying what everyone else is thinking," she insisted, looking around the room for support. "We all paid to be here, and we deserve to feel safe." "Safe from what exactly?" Maya asked, standing slowly from her stool. At her full height, Maya was taller than most of the students in the room, and her bearing spoke of physical confidence and capability. But there was nothing threatening in her posture, nothing that justified Jessica's dramatic claims about safety. "From people who clearly don't belong in academic settings," Jessica said, though her voice wavered slightly. The room fell completely silent. Even Professor Chen seemed at a loss for words, clearly struggling with how to address the escalating situation. Maya looked around at the faces staring back at her, seeing fear, curiosity, embarrassment, and judgment in various combinations. This was the moment Maya had dreaded since deciding to return to school. She had known that her appearance would draw attention and probably criticism. What she hadn't anticipated was how much it would hurt to be dismissed so completely by people who knew nothing about her journey or her sacrifices. For 8 years, she had been part of an elite team where she was valued for her skills, her courage, and her dedication. Her teammates had looked beyond her tattoos to see the warrior underneath. They had trusted her with their lives and had earned her trust in return. Now, in this bright classroom filled with easels and possibility, she felt more like an outsider than she ever had in a war zone. "Class dismissed," Professor Chen said abruptly, clearly needing time to process what had happened. "We'll continue this project on Wednesday." As students began packing up their supplies, Maya remained at her easel, staring at the drawing she had created. The figure on the paper seemed to stare back at her, asking silent questions about courage and belonging. Jessica and Brandon gathered their things quickly, whispering to each other as they shot glances in Maya's direction. Several other students avoided eye contact altogether, clearly uncomfortable with what they had witnessed but unwilling to take sides. "Maya," Professor Chen said softly, approaching after most students had left, "I'm sorry about what happened today. That kind of behavior is unacceptable." Maya nodded but didn't trust herself to speak. The emotions she had kept carefully controlled during the confrontation were threatening to overwhelm her now that the immediate crisis had passed. "Your work shows remarkable skill," Professor Chen continued. "I hope you won't let the ignorance of a few students discourage you from continuing." "Thank you," Maya managed, her voice rough with suppressed emotion. As she packed her supplies, Maya wondered if she had made a mistake in coming back to school. The transition from military to civilian life had been harder than any mission she had undertaken, and moments like this made her question whether she would ever truly find her place in a world that seemed determined to misunderstand her. Walking out of the classroom, Maya felt the weight of stares from students in the hallway. Word had apparently spread about the confrontation in art class, and she could see the judgment in their faces. Some looked afraid, others curious, but none looked welcoming. Outside, Maya sat on a bench and pulled out her phone to call her only real friend from her military days, Marcus, who was dealing with his own civilian transition challenges. "How'd the first day go?" Marcus asked when he picked up. Maya closed her eyes and felt the September sun on her face. "About like we expected," she said simply. "That bad, huh?" "Worse," Maya admitted. "But I'm not giving up, not yet." "Good," Marcus replied. "The Maya Rodriguez I know doesn't retreat from a fight." But as Maya ended the call, and prepared to face the long walk to her car through a campus full of staring students, she wondered if this particular fight was one she could actually win. The enemy this time wasn't a foreign combatant or a military objective. It was prejudice, assumption, and fear of the unknown. And unlike her previous battles, this one couldn't be won with superior tactics or advanced training. This war would require something much more difficult: changing minds and opening hearts. As Maya walked across campus, her head held high despite the whispers that followed her, she began to formulate a strategy for the battles ahead. 3 weeks had passed since Maya's disastrous first day, and the situation had only gotten worse. Word of the confrontation in art class had spread throughout the small campus, growing more distorted with each telling. By now, the rumors painted her as everything from a gang member to a recently released convict, studying art as part of some court-mandated rehabilitation program. Maya tried to ignore the whispers and stares, focusing instead on her coursework. Her art had become even more intricate and powerful, each piece reflecting the complex emotions she carried. Professor Chen had begun staying after class to discuss her techniques, clearly recognizing talent that went far beyond what anyone expected from an introductory course. "Your understanding of light and shadow is remarkable," Professor Chen had said the previous week while examining Maya's latest charcoal drawing. "Have you considered submitting something to the campus art exhibition?" The suggestion had caught Maya off guard. The annual exhibition was a prestigious event that typically showcased work from advanced students and faculty. But the idea of putting her art on public display, especially given the current atmosphere, felt like painting a target on her back. The harassment had become more subtle but more persistent. Students would fall silent when she entered a room, then resume their conversations in pointed whispers once she passed. Someone had started leaving anonymous notes in her locker suggesting she would be more comfortable at a different school. Most cruelly, several students had begun making exaggerated shows of protecting their belongings when she was nearby, clutching their purses and backpacks as if she might snatch them at any moment. Jessica and Brandon had become the unofficial leaders of the anti-Maya campaign. They had recruited several like-minded students who seemed to take pleasure in making her college experience as uncomfortable as possible. They never did anything overtly threatening, always maintaining plausible deniability. But their message was clear: she didn't belong here. Maya's other classes weren't much better. In her literature course, she had offered an analysis of a war poem that drew on her actual experiences with combat. The professor had praised her insight, but several students had exchanged knowing looks, as if her knowledge of warfare confirmed their worst suspicions about her background. The breaking point came on a Thursday morning during a life drawing class. Professor Chen had arranged for a nude model, a standard practice in art education, but one that required maturity and professionalism from the students. Maya had approached the exercise with the same focus she brought to all her artwork, creating a study that captured not just the model's form, but something deeper about human vulnerability and strength.
"That's incredible," whispered Emma, a shy student who sat near Maya but had never spoken to her directly.
"How do you make it look so real?" It was the first positive comment Maya had received from a classmate, and she felt a small spark of hope. "Practice," she replied quietly, not wanting to draw attention to their conversation. Emma leaned closer to examine the drawing. "The way you've captured the emotion in her face, it's like she's telling a story." "Everyone has a story," Maya said, adding delicate shading to the figure's eyes. "Most people just don't take the time to really see it." But their quiet conversation hadn't gone unnoticed. Jessica had been watching from across the room, and during the break she approached with Brandon and 2 other students in tow. "Having trouble with the assignment, Emma?" Jessica asked with false concern. "I know some people find nude models challenging, but you shouldn't feel like you need to get help from questionable sources." Emma flushed red and stammered something about just admiring the technique. But Jessica wasn't finished. "It's just that some of us are concerned about the kind of influences you're exposing yourself to," Jessica continued, her eyes fixed on Maya. "People with certain backgrounds might not have the same respect for the human form that we do." The implication was clear and disgusting. Maya's grip on her charcoal tightened, but she forced herself to remain calm. This was Jessica's game, and Maya wouldn't give her the satisfaction of losing control. "What exactly are you suggesting?" Maya asked quietly, setting down her drawing implement. I'm not suggesting anything, Jessica replied innocently. I'm just looking out for my fellow students. Some of us care about maintaining appropriate boundaries and respecting the artistic process. And you think I don't? Maya's voice remained controlled, but there was steel underneath. Well, people with your background might have different ideas about respect and appropriate behavior, Jessica said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. The room had grown quiet again, with most students pretending to work while obviously listening to the confrontation. Even the model, draped in a robe during the break, was watching with concerned interest. Maya stood slowly, her full height seeming to fill the space around their easels. What do you think my background is exactly? Jessica hesitated for a moment, perhaps sensing that she was stepping into dangerous territory. But Brandon stepped up beside her, emboldened by their previous encounters. Come on, we all know what kind of people get tattoos like that, he said. The criminal justice system, gang activity, drug dealing. You can't expect us to pretend you're here for the same reasons we are. And what reasons are those? Maya asked, her voice dangerously quiet. To get an education, Jessica replied. To better ourselves through learning and personal growth. Not to case the join or recruit new members for whatever organization you're representing. The accusations were so absurd that Maya almost laughed. Almost. But the cruel certainty in Jessica's voice, the way she spoke as if Maya's guilt were already established, triggered something deeper than anger. It touched on the profound sense of betrayal Maya had felt since returning to civilian life, the realization that the country she had served didn't seem to want her back. You think you know me, Maya said, her voice carrying a new edge. You think these tattoos tell my whole story? Don't they? Brandon challenged. People don't get marked up like that unless they're sending a message about what they're capable of. Maya looked down at her arms, at the intricate designs that covered her skin from wrist to shoulder. Each tattoo did tell a story, but not the stories these students imagined. The compass rose on her forearm represented navigation through the darkest waters. The eagle clutching an anchor spoke of service and sacrifice. The names written in elegant script honored fallen teammates who had died protecting people like Jessica and Brandon. You're right, Maya said finally, rolling up her sleeves to reveal more of the detailed artwork. These tattoos do tell stories about what I'm capable of. Jessica and Brandon stepped back slightly, clearly thinking they had finally provoked Maya into revealing her true nature. Other students watched with a mixture of fear and fascination, unsure whether they should call for help or simply run. Maya extended her arm, showing them a particularly intricate design that wrapped around her bicep. This one represents survival, she said calmly. I got it after my first deployment, when I learned that sometimes the only way to protect innocent people is to be willing to face the worst humanity has to offer. The word deployment hung in the air like a puzzle piece that didn't fit Jessica's narrative. She frowned, clearly not understanding what Maya meant but reluctant to admit her confusion. Maya continued, pointing to another tattoo. This one honors my teammates, 5 of the best people I've ever known. They died protecting a convoy of civilians from enemy fire. Her voice remained steady, but there was something in her tone that made the students around her grow very still. Enemy fire? Emma asked quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. Afghanistan, Maya replied simply. 3 tours. Then 2 in Iraq. The room had gone completely silent now. Even Jessica seemed momentarily stunned, as if someone had just revealed that her elaborate theory about Maya's criminal background was built on completely false assumptions. But Jessica recovered quickly, her worldview too rigid to accommodate new information easily. Anyone can claim to be a veteran, she said dismissively. Stolen valor is a real problem. People pretend to be soldiers all the time to get sympathy or special treatment. Maya's expression didn't change, but something dangerous flickered in her eyes. Questioning her service was crossing a line that she wouldn't tolerate, not from ignorant college students who had never risked anything more significant than a bad grade. You think I'm lying about my military service? Maya asked, her voice carrying a quiet intensity that made several students take an unconscious step backward. I think people say whatever they need to say to justify their choices, Jessica replied, though her voice had lost some of its earlier confidence. Maya reached into her backpack and pulled out a small, worn leather wallet. From it, She extracted a military ID card and set it on the table between them. Master Chief Petty Officer Maya Rodriguez, United States Navy SEALs, she said quietly. 8 years active duty, multiple combat deployments, Bronze Star with V device for valor in combat. The ID card lay on the table like a bombshell that had just detonated silently. Students crowded closer, staring at the official documentation that completely demolished every assumption they had made about Maya's background. SEALs? Brandon's voice cracked slightly on the word. Navy SEALs, Maya confirmed. Special operations. The people they send when regular military isn't enough. Emma gasped audibly. Even students who weren't particularly knowledgeable about the military knew that Navy SEALs represented the absolute elite of American Special Operations Forces. The realization that they had been harassing and insulting a decorated war hero was beginning to sink in. But Jessica, faced with the complete collapse of her carefully constructed narrative, doubled down rather than admit she had been wrong. "That doesn't change anything," she said desperately. "Military people can be dangerous too. Maybe even more dangerous than criminals." The comment was so thoughtless, so profoundly ignorant, that it left the room speechless. Maya stared at Jessica with an expression that was more sad than angry, as if she were looking at a broken thing that couldn't be repaired. "Dangerous," Maya repeated slowly. "You think I'm dangerous because I served my country? I think people trained to kill might have trouble adjusting to civilian life," Jessica said, her voice rising with defensive anger. "PTSD, violent tendencies, inability to follow normal social rules. Everyone knows veterans have problems." It was the final straw, not just for Maya, but for several other students who had been watching the confrontation with growing discomfort. The casual dismissal of military service, the broad characterization of veterans as damaged and dangerous, struck many of them as fundamentally wrong. "That's enough," said a voice from the back of the room. David, a quiet student who had never participated in the harassment but had never spoken up against it either, stepped forward. "You've gone way too far." Other voices joined in, students who had remained silent during weeks of bullying finally finding their courage. "She's right, Jessica. This is disgusting. You owe her an apology. I can't believe you said that about veterans." But Maya wasn't interested in apologies or vindication from her classmates. The damage had been done, not just by Jessica's words, but by the weeks of silence from students who had watched the harassment without intervening. The revelation of her military service hadn't changed her fundamental status as an outsider. It had simply shifted the nature of the discrimination she faced. "You're afraid of me," Maya said to Jessica, her voice carrying a weariness that spoke of deeper disappointments. "Not because of anything I've done or said, but because I represent something you don't understand, and instead of trying to understand, you decided to destroy." She began packing her supplies, moving with the efficient precision that had been drilled into her during years of military service. "You want to know what I'm capable of?" She continued without looking up. "I'm capable of running into enemy fire to protect strangers. I'm capable of carrying wounded teammates to safety under hostile conditions. I'm capable of making split-second decisions that mean the difference between life and death for innocent people." Maya stood and shouldered her backpack, then looked directly at Jessica one final time. "But apparently, I'm not capable of sitting in an art class without being treated like a criminal by people who have never risked anything to protect others." As Maya walked toward the door, Emma suddenly spoke up. "Wait," she called out, her voice stronger than it had been all semester. "Don't go, please." Maya paused at the threshold but didn't turn around. "Some of us never believed the things they were saying," Emma continued, her words coming in a rush. "Some of us were just too scared to speak up. But you belong here more than anyone." Maya turned slowly, looking back at the classroom full of students who were seeing her clearly for perhaps the first time. Professor Chen had returned from the break and was taking in the scene with obvious confusion, sensing that something significant had transpired in her absence. "Thank you," Maya said simply to Emma. Then, addressing the room in general, she added, "I didn't serve my country so that I could be thanked for it. I served because I believe people deserve the chance to live freely, to pursue their dreams, to become whatever they're capable of becoming. That includes all of you." The weight of her words settled over the classroom like a challenge. Here was someone who had literally put her life on the line for their freedom, and their response had been to make her feel unwelcome in the very society she had fought to protect. Maya left the classroom with her dignity intact, but she carried with her the profound sadness of someone who had discovered that the country she loved might not love her back. Behind her, she left a room full of students who were finally beginning to understand the true cost of their prejudice and silence. As she walked across campus, Maya noticed that the stairs felt different now. Word of her military service was spreading as quickly as the original rumors had, but this time the whispers carried a different tone. Some students looked at her with newfound respect, others with curiosity, and a few with what might have been guilt. But Maya was tired of being defined by other people's expectations and assumptions. Whether they saw her as a criminal or a hero, they were still not seeing her as simply Maya Rodriguez, a woman trying to build a new life through art and education. That evening, Maya sat in her small apartment, working on a new piece that had been taking shape in her mind throughout the day's events. It was a portrait of a warrior laying down her weapons, not in defeat, but in hope of transformation. The figure's face showed both strength and vulnerability, scarred by battle but not broken by it. As she worked, Maya realized that her fight was far from over. But perhaps it was time to stop fighting against other people's perceptions and start fighting for her own right to define herself. The next phase of her battle would require a different kind of courage. The courage to be authentically herself, regardless of whether others understood or accepted that authenticity. Outside her window, the campus was quiet under the autumn stars. Somewhere in those dormitories and apartments, students were probably still talking about the day's revelations. But Maya was done being their topic of conversation. Tomorrow, she would return to class not as the tattooed girl who had been revealed to be a Navy SEAL, but simply as Maya Rodriguez, artist and student, claiming her right to belong wherever she chose to be. The revelation of Maya's military service had created a seismic shift in the campus atmosphere. Where once students had whispered about her criminal past, they now debated whether Navy SEALs could successfully integrate into civilian academic environments. The ignorance remained, but it had taken on a different flavor, one that Maya found almost as frustrating as the original hostility. Some students now approached her with an uncomfortable mixture of awe and fear, as if she were a museum exhibit rather than a fellow learner. Others seemed to expect her to regale them with war stories or demonstrate combat techniques. A few had begun asking for autographs, apparently believing that proximity to a Navy SEAL would somehow enhance their own status. Maya found the newfound attention almost as alienating as the previous rejection. She hadn't revealed her military background to gain special treatment or become a campus celebrity. She had simply wanted people to understand that their assumptions about her character were wrong. Instead, she had traded one set of misconceptions for another. Professor Chen had approached her after the incident in life drawing class, expressing both concern for Maya's well-being and amazement at the revelation of her military service. "I had suspected there was more to your story," she had said quietly. "Your technical skills and emotional depth suggested extensive experience with both discipline and trauma." "I'm not looking for special consideration," Maya had replied firmly. "I just want to learn and create art like everyone else." "Of course," Professor Chen had agreed. "But perhaps your experience could be valuable to other students, not in a sensational way, but as an example of how art can serve as a bridge between different worlds." The suggestion had planted a seed in Maya's mind, though she wasn't yet ready to embrace the role of teacher or inspirational figure. She had come to college to transform herself, not to become a poster child for veteran integration. Jessica and Brandon had largely disappeared from Maya's orbit since the confrontation. Jessica had initially tried to maintain her position by arguing that military training made Maya an inappropriate presence in civilian educational settings, but the argument had found little support among their classmates. Most students, regardless of their political views, recognized military service as inherently honorable, even if they questioned specific wars or policies. Brandon had simply avoided Maya altogether, clearly embarrassed by his role in the harassment campaign. When they encountered each other in hallways or common areas, he would look away quickly, as if eye contact might somehow force him to acknowledge his previous behavior. The person most affected by Maya's revelation, surprisingly, had been Emma. The shy student had sought Maya out repeatedly, apologizing for her silence during the weeks of harassment and expressing genuine curiosity about Maya's experiences. But Maya remained guarded, uncertain whether Emma's interest was authentic or simply another form of the fascination that had replaced fear in so many of her classmates. "I keep thinking about what you said," Emma had told her after their most recent art class, "about everyone having a story that most people don't see." "What about it?" Maya had replied, focused on cleaning her brushes after a particularly intensive painting session. "I've been wondering what my story is." Emma had continued, I know the facts of my life, but I don't know if I have the kind of depth that shows up in art." Maya had looked up then, seeing something in Emma's expression that reminded her of young recruits she had trained during her military service. There was a hunger there, a desire to be more than circumstances had previously allowed. "Depth comes from choosing to engage with life instead of just surviving it," Maya had said. "It has nothing to do with dramatic experiences or extreme circumstances." "But you've seen so much more than most people," Emma had protested. "Combat, life and death situations, serving your country. How can normal life compare to that?" The question had struck Maya as both naive and profound. How could she explain that some of her most meaningful moments had been quiet ones? Watching a sunrise from a firebase in Afghanistan, teaching a nervous teammate how to properly clean their weapon, sketching portraits of local children during brief, peaceful interludes between missions. "The intensity of experience matters less than your willingness to be present for it," Maya had replied. "Some of the deepest people I know have never left their hometown, and some of the most shallow people I know have traveled the world." It was a conversation that had continued to resonate with Maya as she navigated her evolving position on campus. Students and faculty alike seemed to expect her to be profoundly changed by her military service, to carry wisdom and perspective that set her apart from ordinary people. But Maya knew that her real transformation had begun not during her 8 years in the Navy, but during her struggle to find meaning and belonging in civilian life. The campus art exhibition was approaching, and Professor Chen had continued to encourage Maya to submit a piece. The annual event drew visitors from throughout the regional art community and had launched several student careers over the years. But Maya remained hesitant, uncertain whether she was ready for that level of public exposure. "Your work deserves to be seen," Professor Chen had argued during their latest discussion. "Not because of your military background, but because of its artistic merit." Maya appreciated the distinction, but she knew that her military service would inevitably color how people interpreted her art. The pieces she had created since starting school were deeply personal, reflecting her struggles with identity, belonging, and the challenge of rebuilding life after profound loss. She wasn't sure she was ready to have those intimate expressions dissected by strangers looking for evidence of her military experience. The decision was made for her when she arrived at her locker one morning to find another anonymous note. But this one was different from the harassment she had received previously. Written in careful handwriting, it simply said, "Thank you for your service. Please don't let them silence your voice." The note was unsigned, but something about the handwriting suggested it came from a faculty member rather than a student. Maya stared at it for several minutes, thinking about silence and voice, about the difference between being heard and being understood. That afternoon, she approached Professor Chen with a portfolio of her recent work. "If you think these pieces merit inclusion," she said, "I'd like to submit them to the exhibition." Professor Chen examined each piece carefully, her expression growing more animated with each painting and drawing. Maya's portfolio represented not just technical skill but genuine artistic vision, a unique perspective that transformed personal experience into universal themes of struggle, transformation, and hope. "These are remarkable," Professor Chen said finally. "Each piece tells a story, but they also work together to create a larger narrative about resilience and rebirth." "I don't want them displayed as curiosities," Maya said firmly. "If people are going to look at my art, I want them to see the art first, not the artist's biography." "Of course," Professor Chen agreed. "We'll submit them with minimal biographical information. Let the work speak for itself." As word of Maya's exhibition submission spread through the art department, it created another wave of campus conversation. Some students expressed excitement about having a fellow student's work included in such a prestigious event. Others questioned whether Maya's military background might give her an unfair advantage with judges who valued dramatic subject matter over pure artistic skill. Maya tried to ignore the speculation, focusing instead on her continuing coursework. She had discovered that art offered her something she had never found during her military service, a way to process experience without needing to compartmentalize or suppress emotion. Each painting and drawing became a form of debriefing, a method for integrating traumatic memories into a coherent narrative of personal growth. The process wasn't always pleasant. Some pieces required her to confront memories she had spent years avoiding, moments of fear, loss, and moral complexity that didn't fit neatly into heroic narratives about military service. But the act of transforming those experiences into visual form gave them new meaning, allowing her to see patterns and connections that had been invisible when the memories existed only as isolated fragments of pain. Emma had begun joining Maya during lunch breaks, initially asking questions about art technique, but gradually revealing more about her own struggles with family expectations and personal identity. Her parents wanted her to pursue a practical major, like business or nursing, viewing her interest in art as a frivolous distraction from serious life planning. They think creativity is just a hobby, Emma had confided during one of their conversations. They can't understand that making art might be as important as making money. Maya had recognized the conflict from her own experience. Her parents had been proud of her military service, but puzzled by her decision to pursue art education afterward. They worried that she was avoiding the responsibility of using her military experience to build a stable civilian career. People who haven't experienced the power of creative expression often dismiss it, Maya had told Emma. They see art as decoration rather than communication, as luxury rather than necessity. But how do you know if you're good enough to make it matter? Emma had asked. How do you know if your voice is worth hearing? The question had stayed with Maya long after their conversation ended. It touched on her own deepest fears about the exhibition, about whether her art would be valued for its genuine merit or merely appreciated as an interesting novelty from an unexpected source. As the exhibition opening approached, Maya found herself working with increased intensity, refining pieces and exploring new techniques. The process had become almost meditative, offering her a sanctuary from the ongoing campus speculation about her background and future plans. Professor Chen had arranged for Maya's work to be displayed in a prominent section of the gallery, alongside pieces from advanced students and faculty members. The positioning was both an honor and a source of additional pressure, knowing that her work would be among the first pieces visitors encountered. "Are you nervous?" Emma had asked during their most recent lunch meeting. Maya had considered the question carefully. "I'm concerned about people's motivations for looking at my work," she had replied. "But I'm not nervous about the work itself. I know it represents my authentic experience and perspective." "I wish I had that kind of confidence," Emma had said wistfully. "It's not confidence," Maya had corrected. "It's acceptance. I've stopped trying to control how people perceive me and started focusing on being true to my own vision." It was a hard-won wisdom that had taken years of military service and months of civilian struggle to develop. Maya had learned that seeking approval from others was not only futile but ultimately destructive to genuine creative expression. The only audience that mattered was her own evolving understanding of what it meant to live authentically. The night before the exhibition opening, Maya sat in her apartment, looking at photographs of her submitted pieces. Each work represented a different aspect of her journey, from warrior to artist, from someone defined by external expectations to someone committed to internal truth. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and probably new misunderstandings. Some visitors would undoubtedly view her art through the lens of her military service, looking for evidence of trauma or heroism, rather than simply experiencing the visual and emotional impact of her creative vision. Others might dismiss her work as therapy rather than art, assuming that personal experience automatically undermined aesthetic value. But Maya had finally reached a point where other people's interpretations felt less important than her own commitment to honesty and growth. She had learned to find validation not in external approval but in the simple act of continuing to create, to explore, to transform experience into something that might speak to others facing their own struggles with identity and belonging. As she prepared for bed, Maya reflected on how much had changed since her disastrous first day of art class. She was still the same person, with the same tattoos and the same military background. But she was no longer willing to apologize for those aspects of her identity, or to hide them to make others more comfortable. Tomorrow's exhibition would be another step in her ongoing journey of self-definition. Regardless of how others responded to her work, She would continue creating, continue learning, continue claiming her right to exist as a complex human being whose story couldn't be reduced to simple categories or assumptions. The art would speak for itself, and that would have to be enough. The evening of the art exhibition arrived with an unexpected autumn thunderstorm that seemed to mirror Maya's emotional state. Lightning illuminated her apartment windows as she prepared for what felt like another kind of mission, one where the objective was unclear and the rules of engagement completely unfamiliar. Maya had chosen to wear simple black clothing that wouldn't compete with her artwork for attention, but she couldn't hide the intricate tattoos that extended along her arms and neck. As she looked in the mirror, she saw the same person who had faced down enemy combatants in hostile territory, but the reflection also revealed someone who had been fundamentally changed by months of civilian struggle and creative exploration. The campus gallery buzzed with activity when Maya arrived. Faculty, students, and community members mingled among the displayed artworks, their conversations creating a gentle hum that mixed with the sound of rain against the windows. Maya noticed several local newspaper reporters and art critics who had come to cover the annual exhibition, their presence adding an additional layer of scrutiny to the evening. Professor Chen approached Maya almost immediately, her excitement barely contained. "The response has been incredible," she said quietly. "Your pieces are drawing more attention than anything else in the exhibition." Maya looked across the gallery to where her work was displayed. A small crowd had gathered around the 3 pieces she had submitted, their faces reflecting various degrees of fascination, confusion, and emotion. The centerpiece was her largest painting, a complex work that showed a figure emerging from dark waters while carrying what appeared to be broken wings that were slowly transforming into something whole. "What kind of response?" Maya asked, noting the intensity of the discussions taking place around her work. "See for yourself," Professor Chen suggested, guiding Maya closer to where her pieces hung. As they approached, Maya caught fragments of conversation that revealed the complexity of viewers' reactions. An elderly woman was explaining to her companion how the brushwork reminded her of classical military paintings, while a young man argued with his friend about whether the symbolism was too obvious or perfectly subtle. "The technique is extraordinary," one of the art critics was saying to a colleague. "There's a sophistication here that suggests years of formal training, but also an emotional rawness that feels completely authentic." Maya felt a mixture of pride and discomfort at being discussed as if she weren't present. She had known that public exhibition would subject her work to analysis and judgment, but experiencing it firsthand was more unsettling than she had anticipated. Emma appeared at Maya's side, her face glowing with excitement. "Everyone is talking about your paintings," she whispered. "I heard someone from the Regional Arts Council asking Professor Chen about your background." Before Maya could respond, a distinguished-looking man in his 60s approached them. He had been examining her work intently for several minutes, making notes in a small leather journal. "Excuse me," he said politely. "Are you the artist who created these pieces?" Maya nodded, suddenly aware of how many people in their immediate vicinity were listening to the conversation. "I'm Robert Steinberg from the Metropolitan Museum of Contemporary Art," he continued, extending his hand. "I'm here tonight as a guest judge for the student awards, but I have to say your work transcends typical student categories." The introduction sent a ripple of whispered excitement through the nearby crowd. Maya shook his hand, unsure how to respond to such unexpected recognition. The emotional depth and technical execution suggest extensive artistic experience. "Mr. Steinberg continued, have you studied formally?" "I'm largely self-taught," Maya replied honestly. "Art has been a personal practice for me, rather than academic study until recently." "Remarkable," he said, making another note. "The integration of classical techniques with contemporary themes is quite sophisticated. Your use of light to suggest transformation rather than simply illumination shows real understanding of how visual elements can carry metaphorical weight." Maya felt a warmth of validation that had nothing to do with her military service or personal struggles. This man was evaluating her work purely on its artistic merit, seeing qualities that existed independent of biographical context. "If I may ask," Mr. Steinberg continued, "what inspired the central piece? The symbolism of emergence and transformation is compelling, but there's a specificity to the imagery that suggests personal experience." Maya looked at her painting, seeing it through his eyes. "It's about the process of becoming someone new while still carrying the marks of who you've been," she said carefully, about finding the strength to heal without forgetting the experiences that shaped you. Beautifully expressed, he replied. Art at its best serves that function, doesn't it? Transforming personal experience into universal communication. As their conversation continued, Maya became aware that a larger crowd was gathering, drawn by the combination of critical attention and the mysterious aura that surrounded her work. She noticed Jessica and Brandon among the onlookers, their faces reflecting a mixture of curiosity and discomfort at seeing her receive such positive recognition. Professor Chen had been circulating through the crowd, and Maya could see her engaged in animated discussions with several visitors. When she returned to Maya's side, her expression was almost incredulous. "You're not going to believe this," she said quietly. "The Arts Council wants to discuss a solo exhibition of your work, and there's interest from 3 different galleries about purchasing pieces." The news hit Maya like a physical blow. She had hoped for acceptance and perhaps modest recognition, but the idea that her art might have genuine commercial value hadn't seriously occurred to her. The transition from warrior to student had been difficult enough. The possibility of becoming a professional artist felt overwhelming. "I'm not sure I'm ready for that," Maya admitted. "You don't have to decide tonight," Professor Chen reassured her. "But you should know that this level of response is extremely unusual. Your work is resonating with people in a way that goes beyond typical academic achievement." As the evening progressed, Maya found herself in conversation after conversation with visitors who wanted to understand her artistic process and inspiration. Most were respectful and genuinely interested in the work itself, but she noticed an underlying current of curiosity about the personal story behind the paintings. The revelation came when a local newspaper reporter approached her with a photographer in tow. "Ms. Rodriguez, we'd like to do a feature story about your work and your journey from military service to artistic achievement. Our readers would be fascinated by such an inspiring transformation." Maya felt her heart sink. Despite her hopes that the art could speak for itself, the narrative was already being constructed around her military background. She was about to become not just an artist, but a symbol of veteran rehabilitation and creative therapy. "I prefer to let my work represent itself," Maya said diplomatically, but the reporter persisted. "Of course, but our readers connect more deeply with art when they understand the human story behind it. Your military service adds such a powerful dimension to these themes of transformation and resilience." Before Maya could respond, a voice interrupted from behind her. "Actually, the most powerful dimension is the art itself." Maya turned to see Emma stepping forward, her usual shyness replaced by unexpected assertiveness. "I've been watching people respond to these paintings all evening," Emma continued, addressing the reporter directly. "The ones who are most moved by them don't know anything about the artist's background. They're responding to the universal emotions and masterful technique." "But surely the military context adds significance," the reporter protested. "Why?" Emma asked simply. "Does knowing that Picasso lived through wars make Guernica more meaningful? Does knowing Van Gogh's personal struggles make his paintings more beautiful? Great art transcends biography." Maya stared at Emma in amazement. The shy student who had barely spoken above a whisper for months was now confidently defending the autonomy of artistic expression in front of a crowd of adults. Mr. Pitts, Steinberg, who had been listening to the exchange, nodded approvingly. "The young woman makes an excellent point," he said. "While biographical context can enrich our understanding of art, it should never become the primary source of its value. These paintings succeed because of their aesthetic and emotional power, not because of their creator's resume." The reporter looked frustrated, clearly preferring a human interest angle to an abstract discussion of artistic merit. But Maya felt a profound sense of gratitude toward Emma and Mr. Steinberg for insisting that her work be evaluated on its own terms. As the crowd began to thin toward the end of the evening, Maya found herself standing alone in front of her paintings. The intensity of the response had been both exhilarating and exhausting, forcing her to confront the reality that her art had acquired a life independent of her intentions. Jessica approached hesitantly, her earlier confidence replaced by obvious uncertainty. "Maya, I wanted to apologize," she said quietly. "Not just for the things I said, but for not seeing you clearly from the beginning." Maya studied Jessica's face, looking for signs of sincerity. "What do you see now?" "Someone who's more complex than I gave you credit for," Jessica replied honestly. "I was so focused on categories and assumptions that I missed the actual person." It wasn't a perfect apology, but it represented genuine recognition of error. Maya nodded acceptance without offering forgiveness, understanding that some wounds took time to heal completely. "I hope you'll consider the gallery opportunities," Jessica continued awkwardly. "Your work deserves to be seen by more people." As Jessica walked away, Maya reflected on the strange journey that had brought her to this moment. 6 months ago, she had been a warrior struggling to find her place in civilian society. Tonight, she was an artist whose work had moved strangers to tears and critics to recognition. Emma joined her for a final look at the paintings. "How does it feel?" she asked. "Surreal," Maya admitted. "I came here hoping to learn how to make art. I never expected to discover that I might already be an artist." "The difference being?" Maya considered the question carefully. "Making art is about technique and practice. Being an artist is about having something worth saying and finding the courage to say it." Professor Chen appeared with a folder full of contact information from gallery owners, critics, and collectors who wanted to stay in touch with Maya. "You've made quite an impression," she said with obvious pride. "I still want to finish my degree," Maya said firmly. "Whatever else happens, I came here to learn, and that process isn't complete." "Of course," Professor Chen agreed. "But you should also consider that you might have as much to teach as to learn." As they prepared to leave the gallery, Maya took one last look at her displayed work. The paintings looked different in the context of public exhibition, somehow larger and more significant than they had seemed in her apartment. They had become not just personal expressions, but public statements about the possibility of transformation and the power of authentic voice. Outside, the storm had passed, leaving the campus air clean and filled with the scent of rain-washed earth. Maya walked slowly toward her car, thinking about the choices that lay ahead. Gallery exhibitions, media attention, commercial sales, all possibilities that would require her to navigate new forms of public exposure and potential misunderstanding. But underneath the external opportunities lay a deeper truth that the evening had confirmed. She was no longer the person who had walked into art class 6 months ago, uncertain of her place and haunted by others' perceptions. Through the discipline of creation and the courage to share her vision, she had discovered not just artistic ability but personal authority. The tattoos on her arms told the same stories they always had, but now they were part of a larger narrative that included transformation, growth, and the ongoing process of becoming. Maya Rodriguez, Navy SEAL veteran, had evolved into Maya Rodriguez, artist, without losing the essential elements of her identity that made her work powerful and authentic. As she drove home through the quiet streets, Maya began planning her next series of paintings. There were still stories to tell, still experiences to process, still moments of beauty and pain to transform into visual communication. The recognition was gratifying, but the real reward lay in the continuation of the creative process itself. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and new opportunities to define herself on her own terms. But tonight, for the first time since leaving military service, Maya felt truly at peace with who she was becoming. The girl with tattoos, whom they had mocked and dismissed, had revealed herself to be exactly who she had always been: a warrior, an artist, and most importantly, a human being whose story was still being written.